everyone. Welcome back to a new school year. My name is Francesca Varga. I am the district's ELL coordinator, and today I'm going to be walking you through some of our strategies and supports for working with our English language learner students in your classroom. Thank you for joining me today. Just a quote to think about as we begin. The limits of my language are the limits of my world. Just something to think about when thinking about our children and where they're at, the background that they bring to us. So in this little presentation, we're going to just do a quick ELL overview. So just some general information about English language learners. Then we're going to dive into WIDA and do a quick overview, go through our WIDA standards, and then most importantly and beneficial to you, we're going to tear apart some of those language level strategies and ideas and resources when working with your students. So currently, there are more than 132,000 Indiana students who speak a language other than English at home. Of these students, over 73,000 have been formally identified as English learners due to limited proficiency in speaking, listening, reading, and writing academic English. There are over 290 different languages represented in Indiana schools currently, and our English learners make up roughly 6% of Indiana's total student population. So some legal requirements to familiarize yourself with. Students cannot be labeled as ELL and or placed into services before completing the identification and screening process. So Title III is a federally funded program and is super strict and specific to this process. We will be out of compliance if we do not follow it exactly. So students with a WIDA language score of 1.0 to a 1.9 receive 45 minutes of services 4 times a week. And then students with a WIDA language score of 2.0 to 4.9 receive 30 minutes of services 4 times a week. We can provide more services than the requirement, but we must meet the minimum requirements before we can add additional time for some of our students. So a little bit about the standards. They're chunked into 5 buckets, as I like to call them. Standard 1 is all about communication for social and instructional purposes within the school setting. And so we need to think about the English language when we're talking about WIDA. We're talking about academic English. And so English in classrooms, content vocabulary, school vocabulary, that is the focus of the language development. But with that, especially for our emerging language learners, the social and speaking part of the language is also very important. And so Standard 1 covers that communication. Standard 2, it becomes a little more specific, and it's communicating information, ideas, and concepts necessary for academic success in the content area of language arts. Standard 3 is the same thing, but for math. Standard 4 is for science, and Standard 5 is for social studies. And so here's how we explain our proficiency levels. So their levels do not indicate proficiency of they indicate proficiency of academic English. It does not indicate the reading level. So this is not a Lexile level, a grade level, or where they should be with reading. This is specific to academic English. The proficiency levels, kids will score between a 1 and a 6. And it's encompassed by 3 main criteria. So that's the linguistic complexity, which is the amount and quality of their speech and writing, their vocabulary usage, and so the specificity of words or phrases. That's where that content vocabulary in your classes really hits. And then finally, language control, and so the comprehensibility of the communication based on the amount and types of errors. And so this is a chart or kind of a graphic to represent the different levels of language proficiency. And so as you can see down here, our 1s are entering, our 6, our students who score a 6 are considered reaching, or they're right where they need to be in terms of language. And then it's everywhere on the spectrum between entering and that reaching or achieving place. And so WIDA organizes the standards by can-do descriptors, and they're organized by grade level bands, and they're also organized by key use. And so recount, explain, argue, and discuss, and they're divided up into those four different categories. And so, something to think about, English language development occurs over multiple years. It's variable from child to child and depends on many factors, such as the age of the child, their maturity level, classroom experiencing, programming, motivation, and attitudes. But the can do descriptors illustrate what learners can do by the end of each level. So, between the band of 1.0 and 1.9, 2.0 and 2.9, and so forth um, at each level across the five language development standards. And so, a few strategies in supporting English learners with teacher speech in particular: use gestures, try to speak more slowly, and intentionally enunciate carefully while still using a natural tone and rhythm. And so, of course, we don't want to make students feel out of place or kind of singled out or speak down to them. But it is easier to comprehend instructions when instructions are enunciated clearly and children are spoken to more slowly. You can adjust your questioning techniques so that students can respond in a way that is appropriate for their stage of English proficiency. And so, for example, for a level 1 or 2 student, maybe providing some visuals or a vocab bank for them to use is super helpful. And with, say, our 4s through 6s, they are not going to need as much support as our emerging learners. Or another strategy could be live digital translation during instruction using extensions such as Snap and Read and Google Translate that are available to you. Provide as many opportunities as you can for interaction. And so it's that adequate wait time, kind of that thinking time to gather thoughts and before vocalizing the answer. Using a think, pair, share model, cooperative learning projects, anything that is project based, working with a buddy. The more students are able to interact with the language, even if they don't know any English at all when they first come, the more they're exposed to it and they're part of class discussions and they're hearing it, the easier it's going to be. Okay, so for vocabulary development, some ideas are word walls, word sets, concept definition maps, similar to the little graphic that we have here. Dramatization, so acting things out, or skits, drawing, and matching word to image. Once again, you can provide vocabulary banks and visual cues as well. Another thing to do is to modify texts. So there are many supplemental resources available to you for our students. Highlighted text, audio text, adapted text, or translated text. And so anytime we're able to translate, modify that text slightly, give an audio option, these are also very helpful strategies to use. And then when thinking about assessments, how can we use alternate forms of assessments for students to assess where they are in terms of skills and standards, even if there is a language development on the table? So things you can do: observations, formal performance assessments, and so that would be your benchmark assessments. Those would be your unit assessments, models and visual displays, graphic organizers, self-assessment, so asking students to assess their own growth or their own skill levels as well, and then having some differentiated scoring as in line with modifications or accommodations or where your students' needs are. So here's an example of a quick way that we can differentiate a writing assignment. So looking at this, I have my 6 levels of language development here, and just breaking it down using different strategies, we're going to be talking about the water cycle. And so for a student who's emerging or level 1, Explain by labeling charts and graphs to describe the phenomena. So lots of graphic representation, labeling the water chart, providing that word bank and those vocabulary terms is very helpful. For a level 2 student, you explain by using key terms related to the phenomena and listing steps. And so at this point, they're starting, they're not emerging anymore. And so there is the foundations of good language development. And so we just need to really build on that foundation, that language foundation that they are currently at. And so using key vocabulary words to list specific steps in the water cycle process. And so with level ones, it's more kind of general concepts and identification of vocabulary. By level 2, we're starting to teach more specific terms. At level 3, you can explain by answering how or why questions. And so explain how the water cycle works versus just labeling it or using a few key vocabulary words. At level 4, we can explain by elaborating topics with facts, definitions, concrete details, etc. And so we can explain the water cycle stages and their importance. By level 5, it's explain by describing how factors contribute to events or outcomes. And so as you can see, it's getting more and more and more complex in terms of the expectations for students to be able to communicate their understanding. And then last but not least, at level 6, this would be presenting information on processes or phenomena supported by facts and details. So at the level 5 or 6, this is going to be your typical assignments that you would probably be giving your non-English language learner students. And so it's just a matter of modifying these assignments in little ways so everyone can be successful. Okay, well, as always, thank you so much for joining. Thank you for your attention today. Please reach out if you have any questions. Rachel and Janet are our teachers in our buildings, our teachers of record who are working with our students. And then Ramona and Mary are our assistant teachers working with students in kindergarten through 8th grade. At the high school, Megan McLaughlin is our teacher who is providing services and working with our English language students at the high school. And you can always reach out to me as well if you have questions, if you need resources. Our team would love to communicate with you and see how we can be of support. Thank you so much. Have a great day.